Go ahead.
Great. Welcome, everyone. I'm calling the regular meeting of the Ross Town Council on Thursday, October 8th, 2020 to order. Linda, could you please take the roll?
Yes, Councilmember Barakas, I do not see her in here.
She is on the, I saw her name on the attendee.
This is Olivia Breckus. That must be.
That's her daughter.
But I mean, maybe she's using her computer.
Right.
Okay, so can we move her as a panelist
I'm trying here.
There, I see her.
And
and move Rich as a panelist too?
I'm here, sorry.
Okay.
Okay,
There you are.
and Councilmember Kircher,
Here.
and Councilmember Cool,
Here.
and Councilmember Robbins,
here,
and Mayor McMillan.
Here.
Okay,
Thank you. Has the agenda been posted?
yes.
Item number 3 is approval of the regular meeting minutes from Thursday, September 10, 2020. And Linda circulated some changes proposed by Bill Kircher. Does anyone else have any other comments? Do we need to take, we don't need to take public comment on the minutes, do we, Ben? Okay, so does anyone have any comments on Bill's proposed changes? Okay, then can we have a motion to approve these September 10, 2020 meeting minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, let's take the vote. Councilmember Breckus,
Aye.
Councilmember Kircher,
Aye.
Councilmember Cool,
Aye.
Councilmember Robbins,
aye.
and Mayor McMillan.
Aye.
And the motion passes as amended.
Thank you. Have the demands been met? Can't hear you, Joe.
Yes, they have.
Thank you. Now is the time for public expression, and comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker for items that are not on our agenda this evening. Linda, do you see anyone who wants to make a public comment?
No, I do not. If anyone wants to raise their hand, now is the time to do so. Going once, going twice. Nope.
Okay, thank you. Mayor's report. Before I begin my mayor's report, I want to welcome and recognize Girl Scout Troop 10926 Ross Juniors. This group of 7 ambitious 5th grade girls at Ross School is currently working on their democracy badge, and some are joining our meeting tonight to observe how the legislative branch of our government works. Thanks to their troop leader, Brigitte Brady Harris, for helping these young ladies. And it probably doesn't surprise any of you that I was a Girl Scout. My troop number was 1020. Eons ago. So here's my mayor's report. Although we continue to be challenged by so many things, most recently horrific wildfires in the wine country, we still have much to be thankful for. The Marin Art and Garden Center honored Diane Duda at its recent 75th anniversary celebration. Joining the board in 2008 and serving as president since 2010, Diane was recognized as, quote, the most important person to Marin Art and Garden Center since founder Caroline Livermore in 1945, with her extraordinary work and vision. Thank you, Diane. Dedicated Ross Property Owners Association members Ann Hickey, Iris Winey, and John Kiekeffer recently retired from the RPOA board. Collectively, they served our town for nearly half a century. Ann, 32 years, Iris, 12 years, John, 5 years. Each worked tirelessly, and we thank them. Parents in the community are excited that children are finally able to return to Ross School with distance learning outside. Soon, students will also be back at Branson, which is similarly using outdoor areas as classrooms. Both schools have worked diligently for months to navigate a complex environment for safe reopenings. Next weekend, on Friday, October 16 and Saturday, October 17, the town will close Redwood Avenue at the Common and set up tables and chairs for outdoor dining. Thanks to our charming restaurants, Crown and Crumpet, Marché au Fleur, Tony Tutto, Trattoria Fresco, and Village Corner, we can all enjoy a delicious meal outside with our neighbors. Finally, thanks to Ross Ready, we have another opportunity to get better prepared for emergencies with another walkie-talkie training on Sunday, October 11. While this will target our new Winship Park Firewise block captains, all residents are welcome to join the Zoom call. If you'd like to join, email rossready94957@gmail.com. We thank Gil Fleitas and Roger Dickerson for spearheading these community-based volunteer programs. We continue to hold all fire victims and firefighters in our thoughts and prayers. Please stay safe. Council, committee, and liaison reports. Council?
I have a report.
Yes, Bill.
I attended via Zoom a retreat for MCE, formerly Marin Clean Energy, which is now expanded to a 4-county area, including Marin. This was an all-day retreat. It was very informative. MC is celebrating its 10th anniversary. And it's gone from a rather small organization promoting clean energy in Marin with a budget of a couple $100,000 to a budget that's in the hundreds of millions of dollars now. Just very quickly, its primary function is to promote projects like solar and alternative energy sources, and also to procure energy from renewable sources and distribute it through the PG&E system. PG&E handles all the billing and administrative matters in that connection. It's also involved in promoting the building of charging stations for electric vehicles. It's now involved in promoting battery backup for resiliency in the case of planned power outages and so forth. And so there was a review of the projects, a review of some of the difficulties given COVID, but I'm happy to report that MCE is financially very healthy. In fact, just had its credit rating increased. And it's looking forward to more ambitious projects in the future, depending on what happens. I also want to report not a meeting with ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments, but ABAG is getting ready to consider how to allocate housing goals in the next period, the upcoming period. And there's going to be a fair amount of controversy about that. There's a fairly large allocation coming to Marin County. I don't know that, I haven't finished trying to figure out what the impact on Ross would be. I think there's quite an impact on, say, San Anselmo and Novato. So I don't have any details to report yet, but I think that's something that will probably be before the council in the future.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody else? Beach. Beach, did you have something?
Yes, I did. I'm sorry. I got a copy in my mailbox of TAM's annual report by its oversight committee. I assume everybody else got a copy also. If you're interested at all in TAM, it's a great document because it really outlines what TAM is up to and the various projects and activities, which some of which affect us directly, like school crossing guards, and others which affect us less directly, such as improving highways all over the county. So if you got a little extra time, it's worth taking a look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Beach. Anybody else? I just wanted to mention to all of you that the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, its first executive officer started on October 1st. His name is Mark Brown. He is going to try to visit with all 17 jurisdictions to introduce himself and answer any questions. So hopefully he will be on our agenda in the near future. Number 8, staff and community reports. Town Manager Joe Chin.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. A few quick updates on public works projects. As you've all probably seen, the long overdue Bolinas Avenue is now completed. And I have heard many positive things about the roadway. Obviously, in last year, they had the drainage improvements. So a long time improvements needed are done on that. Related to Frederick Ellen tennis courts, they're in the process of being resurfaced. They're closed currently, but they should be open to the public by the end of October, and obviously with new playing surface. And to reiterate something the mayor mentioned is hopefully everybody could make the outdoor dining on the Ross Common and Redwood. That's going to be occurring on next Friday and Saturday, October 16th and 17th. Please visit our downtown restaurants and businesses. And one side project we did in relation to the downtown is, if you've noticed, this week we've placed 3 new picnic tables on the common right next to Redwood to give additional outdoor dining opportunities for residents. And that's my report.
Thank you, Joe. Next, Ross Property Owners Association, Marcia Skall. Linda, could you move Marcia so we can, there you go. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Hi, Marcia. Yes.
Hi there. How are you? Okay, so I guess I'd like to start out with just saying, as a refresher for anybody who's online. Oh, here, I can start my video so you're not looking at a black screen. There I am. Hi. Just as a refresher, the Ross Property Owners Association's primary objective and purpose is to provide funds and services for the benefit of the general and school community of the town of Ross. As of October 5th, 2020, our membership is at 261 members. We are still continuing our 2020 membership drive, which kind of got thwarted with COVID and also the introduction of our new website. So we're still wrapping that up, only to start all over again in January of 2021. The Ross Property Owners Association has, one of the most exciting things is that the Ross Property Owners Association has joined forces with the Ross Auxiliary, and both groups are really excited to work together. It's a great fit because both groups have very similar objectives. Our audience is the same. One of our first joint efforts will be for the RPOA and the Ross Auxiliary to work together to put together a more robust database that both of our organizations can use for communication to our members about newsworthy items, town updates, events, and membership drives. The best part about it is we have several new board members, and they're young and they know how to use technology. So I think we're going to be zoomed into the 21st century. During our October 5th meeting, we spent some time discussing some different ideas about what our next project should be for beautification of Ross, or how to improve the lives of our townspeople. So there was some discussion about placing a water fountain on the commons or near the Ross post office. There was also a second idea and some conversation around a public restroom with the thought in the downtown area, and with the thought being that if there was some way that we had a pit stop or a reason to stop, so the bikers that come through town they might stop for, to use the restroom or the water fountain, and then maybe avail themselves of some of the businesses that are downtown. So there was some discussion around that. We would, of course, welcome any ideas from the town council or any other constituents of the town. And I know Joe was part of that conversation and heard our discussion. And then lastly, the upcoming events that the auxiliary wanted me to remind everybody of, and Joe already mentioned, was the dining al fresco. The auxiliary is contributing by bringing some lights, and I think they'll have some musical entertainment, which should make it more festive and enjoyable. And then on the Winter Sing is December 6th. And that's from 5 to 6:30. We'll have more information and we'll probably advertise that a little bit more. And then, of course, the Ross Property Owners Association will be doing our changing of the banners come winter time, and we'll be doing the holiday garland and the town wreaths. So that is my report.
Thank you, Marcia. That's all
Thank you.
great. Thank you
Okay.
for all your work.
Sure.
Item number 9, consent agenda. There's 2 items. Does anyone on the town council want to move an item off of the consent agenda? Linda, does anyone from the public want to move an item? Do you see anyone raising their hand? Linda?
No, I do not, sorry.
Thank you. All right. So could we have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, let's take the vote. Councilmember Breckus,
Aye.
Councilmember Kircher,
Aye.
Councilmember Cool,
Aye.
Councilmember Robbins,
Aye.
and Mayor McMillan.
Aye.
Okay, the consent agenda, A and B, passes unanimously.
Thank you. Item number 10, 400 Upper Toyon Road, annexation, pre-zoning, and general plan amendment, and town council consideration of introduction of ordinance number 707, and town council consideration of adoption of resolution number 2181. Patrick.
Okay, thank you, Mayor McMillan and members of the council. And I'm sharing my I'm sharing my screen. Is that visible to everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
So the item before you is annexation pre-zoning and general plan amendment for 400 Upper Toyon Road. This may look familiar to you because you looked at this exact same project at the September meeting. In March of 2017, an application was made to annex the property into Ross from San Rafael. It's currently developed with a single-family dwelling and a private road. That annexation took place in August of 2019. And what's supposed to happen is that the town pre-zones the property so that it has a zoning ordinance applied to it before that annexation takes place. This went out of order, so it's already been annexed into the town. So our cleanup here is to apply a general plan designation and zoning to it. So on September 10th, the council met sitting as the planning commission, and at that time made a recommendation that it be pre-zoned and that the general plan be amended. The zoning was recommended as R1B5A, that's single family residential with 5-acre parcels, and very low density general plan designation. And as you can see in this before and after image, it's kind of a long parcel that includes that private road as well as some property owned by the water district. The project was reviewed in compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act. The Local Agency Formation Commission, LAFCO, that's the lead agency. Ross is a responsible agency. LAFCO adopted a resolution in August when they did the annexation, and they found the project exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act via a Class 19 exemption for annexations of properties. And so with that, it's the recommendation of staff that the town council introduce ordinance 707, which would assign the parcels in question with the single family residential 5-acre lot size zoning district, and adopt resolution number 2181, which would assign the parcels a Ross general plan designation of very low density. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Patrick. Council, anybody have any questions about Patrick's presentation? Does any member of the public have any comments? Linda, do you see anybody?
No, I do not.
Okay, thank you. We'll bring it back to the council for any discussion or a motion.
I move we approve resolution 2181.
Second.
Are you doing the resolution and ordinance separately?
Oh, and also approve ordinance number 707.
Okay. Let's take the vote. Councilmember Breckus
Aye.
and Councilmember Kircher,
Aye.
Councilmember Cool,
Aye.
and Councilmember Robbins.
Aye.
Mayor McMillan.
Aye.
And the motion passes for both the resolution and the introduction of the ordinance.
Thank you, Linda and Patrick.
Thank you.
Next is item number 11, Town Council and Staff Discussion of Town's Options to Fund Private Roadways with Public Funding. Joe and Rich are going to discuss that. I am recused since I live on a private road, so I will be stopping my video for this conversation.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Rich Simonich, Public Works Director. Tonight, we have a presentation, a council and staff discussion of town's options to fund private roadways with public funding. The outline tonight is we're gonna have a little bit of background. First off, the town received a request signed by 32 residents to review our policy towards private roads. The request asks the town to consider appropriating a prorated portion of the town's road impact fees to private roads when money is collected for building permits along private roads. We're going to take a brief look at the public and private roadway system in Ross and look at some funding sources for public roadways and the risk in maintaining, repairing, and rehabilitating private roads. And then we'll look at some alternatives and options. So the public and private roadway system in Ross, we have 11 centerline miles of public roadways. We have another 3 centerline miles of private roadways, and these were at one time offered for dedication to the town for maintenance. And the town council or the town trustees rejected the offer of dedication for one reason or another. Then there are 3.3 centerline miles of private roads. These are generally considered common driveways. They're easements that run across the land, and each individual property owner owns property in fee to the center line of that roadway, usually. So, and then I have a little diagram here. This is the northeast section of Ross, kind of shows all 3 of the types of roads we have. This highlighted here in red, that's the town maintained road portion of Wellington Avenue, and there's Madera Court. And then here we have Baywood and Crest. These were created with a Winship Park subdivision back in the early 1900s. These portions of Winship Park were never really approved when the town Board of Trustees accepted the rest of Winship Park into the town maintained system. So these still remain owned basically by the original underlying fee owner. So it's considered a private road. It's owned by some sort of private entity that may or may not exist still. And then over here we have Pomeroy Road, which is basically the easement that runs along the property lines of each of the separate properties in most cases. Sometimes it breaks off into the actual lot. So these are basically private driveways in a sense. So those are the 3 basic types of roadways that we have here in Ross serving our residential properties. So privately owned and maintained roads are not through streets usually, and may or may not meet the town's current standards regarding their 40-foot right-of-way width. lane striping, signage, and structural integrity, which means the condition of the pavement and especially the condition of the sub-base material and base material, which we can't really see, but is 9 times out of 10, if you don't service that stuff after 20 years, it can be compromised as far as its integrity. Town does not provide public funding for private road repair, maintenance, and rehabilitation to private roads. So this is a map that basically shows our public and town maintained roadway system and our privately maintained roads. This is what I refer to when I get an encroachment permit that comes into my office. By now I know by heart which roads are town maintained and which are not. So, but this is a good reference for anybody doing permitting to see which one of our roads are town maintained and which are not. And you can see it's rather extensive system that we have. And you can also note that most of the non-town maintained private roads are on the outer west and eastern and southeastern, southwestern fringe of the town, whereas any projects on those roadways invariably have to cross town maintained roadways. So the funding sources for the town maintained road system, I'm going to hand that over to our town manager, Joe Chin, and he's going to take it from here. And Joe, let me know and I'll control the slideshow.
Thanks, Rich. The town utilizes a variety of dedicated funding sources for our public road maintenance, operations, and rehabilitations. Most of the sources are dedicated funds with very specific rules and requirements on what they can be legally used for. You see the list, the top 4 are what I'd call the specific rule ones, the dedicated. There's our road impact fees, state gas taxes and other state, the RMA fund, TAM funds and other funding we get from federal and states. And then we can get some for specific projects like federal highway fund toll credits, such as on Winship Bridge. And then the 5th source shown here is the general fund. The general fund has more discretion on how it can be spent. And there's more, as we'll go through, it's spent on a variety of different types of services versus these more dedicated road sources. Related to public government, the question before us is the public government potential funding of private roads. The vast majority of entities do not provide funding for private roadways. In the experience of myself, the Public Works Director and Town Attorney, we know of only one entity that provides public funds for any part of private road maintenance, and that's San Anselmo. That being said, San Anselmo does not use road fees or gas taxes. They use a tax measure that was passed for infrastructure and variety of services, a portion of that. No entity in the petition we saw or in correspondence said, could you use street sweeping? We know of no entity government that uses public funds for street sweeping of private roads, and San Anselmo does not do that. I'll go through a few of these the major fund sources, starting with the road impact fees. Rich, if you can. Road impact fees are defined in the government code sections for under public facilities. And the definition is public facilities include public improvements, public services, and community amenities. If road impact fees are provided for a private road, it would be deemed to be a public facility, and the town would be responsible for the cost of repairing and maintaining the roadway in the future. The fee, the road impact fee, is assessed for development in both public and private roads because traffic created by the development travels through town-maintained public roads to get to any site. For example, if you had a development project on Crest, which is a private road, you would inevitably be traveling on Sir Francis Drake, parts of Winship, and the stretch of Wellington that's public to get there. Obviously, in some ways, that's a much shorter trip or a much longer trip on the public roadway system than if somebody was on Garden to be going to. So all these, whether you're in a public or private development, you're using the public roadway system, and that's what the fee was developed, is to fund the public roads. Next slide. The gas tax and recently passed by the state's voters and legislators, the road maintenance and rehabilitation account, provide a source of funding for the town to maintain our public roadways. And it's in the California law. All monies in the highway users tax account, which is another name for gas taxes, is to be appropriate for a number of things, but all related to the maintenance and operation of public streets and highways and the related public facilities. Note the word public. And similar to road impact fees, if gas taxes or RMRA funds are provided to a private road, it would be deemed to be a public street, and the town would be responsible for the cost of repairing and maintaining that roadway in the future. Next slide. The one source that has more, and to our knowledge, we have never heard of anybody using road impact fees or gas taxes to fund private roadways in any way. The general fund. Now, the general fund consists of the non-restricted revenues such as the property tax, sales tax, other taxes, department charges, rental fee, income. This source of funds can legally be used to maintain private roads. Ross currently uses our general fund for all of our departments, such as police, fire, planning and building, public works, recreation, and general government. This is our main funding source for all of our departments, outside of specific dedicated funds such as the capital project funds we talked about in the roads and or drainage, or COPS funding, COPS being the program giving a small piece from the state. In effect, this revenue assists in providing the source of funding for the general fund departments, and there was not sufficient funds in the general fund itself to fund these departments, so the town residents have passed the public safety tax to help provide additional sources of funding for police and fire department costs on top of our general fund. The use of any general fund for private road maintenance has some risk involved, which we will go through, as well as it would reduce the revenue that would be available for other general fund services that serve the entire public and not just along a private roadway. Next slide. So there's a number of risk factors we want to go through if the council did want to look at using the general fund for road maintenance or operations. The town would increase its potential risk of assuming liabilities for dangerous conditions of privately owned roads. A city may be liable for injuries from its street if a plaintiff could show that the city controlled the property in question. For liability to be imposed, the city must be in a position to protect against or warn of the hazard, whether or not it owns the property. The critical inquiry is whether the city had the power to prevent, remedy, or guard against that dangerous condition. This also applies to road signage, alignment and obstructions, all of which could contribute to dangerous conditions if not managed appropriately. The risk and liability cost is greater for private roads than public roads because none of the private roads were constructed to town standards, and a large share of them have not been regularly maintained. As such, there's a greater likelihood of road failures and accidents due to road conditions on these roads compared to town public roads. If the town were going to contribute funds to an otherwise assist with the repair and maintenance of a private street, that contribution would also likely trigger state prevailing wage requirements, making a private road project into a prevailing wage project would likely increase the cost of the project as well as lengthen the timeline of construction. The town need not just, normally the way roads are accepted as a public road into the town system is that the town council accepts it into the public road system. However, the town need not formally accept the road into the road system for a road to be considered a public road. Instead, since the town begins maintaining once the town begins maintaining and or rehabilitating a privately owned, publicly accessible road, the town may implicitly accept the road into its road system. The road may indeed, that wasn't formally accepted as a public road, be considered a public road once it is subject to public control. For this reason, if the town opts to maintain or rehabilitate the roads in question, the town would likely be committing to ongoing maintenance and rehabilitation of that road, which ongoing maintenance and rehab costs increases the town's exposure to liability. It would be precedent setting if we maintained private roads. If we agreed to maintain and or rehabilitate one privately owned road, it may establish a precedent suggesting that all privately owned roads are subject to maintenance and rehabilitation of the town. Clearly, if one street received funds, the other private roads would be looking for the same. The precedent would be costly because there are 6.3 miles of privately owned roads in the town to be maintained, repaired, and the additional liability costs associated with them. Funding of any additional road miles of private roads would reduce the funding for other roadways in the town or reduce the ability to fund other services we provide in the town. Next. There are some alternative options versus what we see on the fees to be looked for. And the top one we've started that in recent years, conditioning permit applicants to document the conditions pre-construction and repair any damage to the property, including private and public, that occurs with the development. And that has been utilized in projects in town to help repair private road facilities. Second, we do help where we can assist with the creation of or encourage participation with formal and informal neighborhood road maintenance associations. Another thing we could do is enforce the utility contractors who often go and cut into roadways, whether it's water, sewer, gas lines, but to provide the notice of the open trench or other street cut work on private roads and make them rehabilitated under the uniform construction standards that's been adopted by Marin county and the cities in Marin. Next. With that, the staff recommendation is against utilizing any public funding sources to maintain private roadways, keeping our current practice, which is the practice of most cities in California. Opting into, as we said, repair and maintenance of private roadways would be ongoing, costly, and subject the town to liability. And with that, if there's any council questions and discussion.
Thank you, Joe. That was very clear. Do any council members have any questions for town staff?
Yes, I do.
Beach?
Yeah, thank you. Joe, I'm a little concerned about the authority that backs up some of the statements that you've made. For example, in the staff report at page 2-3 of 11, you say that once the town begins maintaining and/or rehabilitating a privately owned, publicly accessible road, the town may impliedly accept that road into its road system. Is there any case that says that that's so?
I'm gonna hand this to the town attorney.
Okay.
Yes, there's cases that that the court have found that the implied acceptance can happen by the towns maintaining the roads. I can look up the case in a moment, but there's a line of cases that do that. So that's why cities, besides actually accepting the roads into the public system, if they have a history, the courts will look at whether there's been a history of control or operation or maintenance performed on those private roads in determining whether there's been an implied acceptance of the roads into city streets, rather than the formal process of a dedication and an acceptance.
Okay. And Joe, I'm not quite clear from from our staff report or from the letters and the communications we've gotten from private citizens quite what it is they want. Do you have an understanding of what they want us to do? Let me preface that by saying I can see some arguments why it's reasonable or it's fairer to maybe do something for them, but I do have concern about the implied liabilities and so forth. But anyway, do you understand what they want?
The original petition was asking for the town's assistance to help with the operation and maintenance of private roadways using the road impact fee. Now, clearly, I would say we should not use the road you should not use the road impact fee or gas tax at all costs, given the legal framework. You could use general fund. Now, general fund has the discretion, but they're asking to fund a portion, I think similar, really, they want looking for something similar to San Anselmo. And also in some, I can't remember if it was the original petition or another, for street sweeping. We street sweep public roadways, not private roadways. In talking to all the Marin jurisdictions, I got survey responses back, and all our prior jurisdictions where we worked, no one provides assistance with street sweeping private roadways with public money.
Well, do the private roadways in Ross have street sweeping service that they pay for themselves or something?
I don't know, or if they get swept. I do not know if they get swept or not.
Okay, and I mean, for example, would we be okay with these with these issues of implied assumption of control if, for example, could we agree that projects which ordinarily would pay the impact fee, which are on private roads, could be, for example, only charged half of the impact fee that those which are on public roads were charged. Could we do that? Something
would-
like that?
I would think we can't without a study showing why they would have less public benefit. In the cases of most of these private roads, they have at least as people, the development of private has at least as much use of the public roads as people that are located in the public roads, because in a lot of cases, they're further back and you go through. If you looked at that map, many of these roads are up the hills after going through the whole public roadway system. So take a Ivy Drive and the residents there. To get to Ivy Drive, you're going on Sir Francis Drake. Then you're either coming in on Bolinas or Lagunitas. You're going on Shady Lane, and then the whole length of Southwood before you even get to Ivy. So in effect, they're paying for the cost of using the public roadway system, the damage done. That isn't reduced because they're in these private areas. In effect, in some cases, it's greater than, say, somebody located on Shady Lane that uses less, their development traffic uses less of the roadway than these located in the private areas.
But on the other hand, they don't get street sweeping.
That's a whole different, road impact fees cannot pay for street sweeping. Road impact fees could only pay for rehabilitation of roadways.
I mean,
By law.
where I'm going is I see an equitable argument in their favor, but I also see a lot of roadblocks to doing anything about it. And I guess where I come down is I wish I had a better handle on what it's all about than I do now. I'm not sure exactly what I want, other than maybe some clearer proposal from the people who support this about what they want and why they think it's appropriate. I mean, I understand they don't think these implied cases affect them somehow. I do. But I wish I knew more. I just have the feeling that I'm not in a position to make a good judgment. And I guess that's not a question, so I'll withdraw it and hold it for when we're making comments. Thank you.
Are there any other questions of staff?
Yes, if I may. We've discussed, or staff has discussed the fact that when there's a construction project, the construction equipment will use both public roads and if the project's on a private road, the private road. I'm wondering if there's any way to quantify what the impact is on the public roads versus the private roads. And let me just make this more specific with an example. Let's say you have a cement truck, and on some of these projects, a whole series of cement trucks going to the project with concrete. To get to the private road, they have to go over a public road, but once they get on the private road, they're not just going to go to the site, they're probably going to stay there for quite a while to empty the concrete that they brought to the project. So these heavy trucks are literally physically present on those roads. Presumably there's some wear and tear factor here, as opposed to them simply moving across the public roads to get there. I mean, do we have any information, any statistics or any way to break this down and be more specific as to the relative impact on the private road versus the public road? And I know there are lots of different scenarios here, so this would have to be an extreme generalization if it were even possible to do so.
Without a whole mapping, you couldn't, I mean, without mapping every construction project and how, and each project would be different. And remember, the road impact fees that, I guess that one is a source that by law you can only use on public facilities. You set up the fee based on the cost relative to the public roadways. So really, where we're talking about road impact fees a lot, and that's what they mentioned, I don't see any ability to use them unless you want to make these roads public roadways. And hence, then you're taking on everything associated with it. And under law, I mean, you could use general fund, but that's, when you're talking about the fee, that is a fee. The public road impact fee is under the government codes for public roadways.
I can jump in.
And the cost associated is only related to the public. We're not looking at the cost of private. Supposedly you'd have a larger cost to fund if you included the private in. But by law, we can't go there unless you wanted to make them all public roads. But then you greatly expanded our cost obligations in our general funds, our gas tax road funds, and the rest of your roads will not be maintained nearly to the level. And my guess is you'd have to take money from other general fund services once you do it, depending on the dollar level. Do you take from public works or recreation or police or fire for what? And remember, everybody that lives in a private roadway area signed, when they bought the house, they lived on a private roadway too. I live in an area with private roads, and we know we pay for them, and we do it. Never thought for a moment that public funds would take over my private responsibility when I bought into a private road area. So in effect, is that the general public, should the general public be paying for these end of the road cul-de-sacs that have always been private roads that were never constructed at, in some places at the right-of-way or standards of the public road system?
I understand there's a problem, a legal problem with using impact fees per se to fund this. So I would be talking, well, I'm not talking, I'm really asking questions, but if there were a proposal, I think we have to assume it would be based on the use of general fund revenues rather than a specific fund. My second question is, and this is something that I basically took from reviewing what San Anselmo has done. And they appear to have a program that is available both for private roads and public roads, where the town will contribute some fund, not fund directly, but contribute some fund to a community association that is set up with the goal of improving their roads. And in this scenario, the property owners would contribute something and the town would contribute something. And San Anselmo has stated, I believe, that they have a public policy in favor of encouraging people, private property owners, to contribute to the maintenance and improvement of their roads. If Ross were to do something like this and simply contribute money to the association that was set up to do this, without directing how the funds could be spent or in any way imposing any restrictions other than that it would have to be used in some fashion by the community association for the improvement of the roads. Does that pose the same problem of the town making the project with respect to a private road, some sort of public facility, or assume liability? Or would there be enough distance between what the town is doing, simply making a contribution, and then what the private property owners are doing on their own?
So let me answer that question. I actually had a chance to go through the San Anselmo information, and I think it's pretty instructive in that what I took away when reading, all the requirements of that program is they have the same understanding of risk that we're talking about tonight. And the way they are trying to address it is, one, I think they have as you just stated, they have a policy to want to do this, number one, and incur that risk of a potential dangerous conditions lawsuit or a potential argument that the town has a duty to maintain. And the way I saw that they try to address that risk is require indemnification and hold harmlesses from all the property owners who sign on to that program along that street, which I was able to talk to this, to the city attorney today. And that's it's a tough pill for the homeowners to swallow, for all of them to sign that. So that decreases the city's liability. It doesn't get rid of it. It just means if you get sued for all these things that are in our staff report tonight, you would then go after the homeowners to indemnify the town for that lawsuit. So I think they understood some of the risks involved, but they have chosen to kind of come up with a program to address the best they can, but it doesn't eliminate the risk. You have to understand that. And then I think the other issue that I don't see addressed in their paperwork is the issue of prevailing wages, which I think is a real issue. So if we went down this road, I would have to figure out how to protect the town from a claim of prevailing wages when you're giving public money for a private project. It can trigger prevailing wages in certain circumstances.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
And Ben, maybe this is something you could answer. There was a resident, Gina, who had cited a case, and I just wondered if you had an opportunity to look at that.
Yeah. So those cases, that case, and it's built off this statute from the Civil Code, which was enacted from 1972, when there was a long line of cases establishing a implied dedication and what it took for the public to establish an implied dedication. And that case addressed, what are the factors of implied dedication? That's not really the issue that we're talking about tonight. We're talking about what is an implied acceptance. And once we have acceptance, what that then brings the road into as a public road into our, all our duties that we do for every other public road. And one of the factors that, the courts, like I said earlier, will look at is whether there's been a pattern practice of maintenance, and looking at whether there's been implied acceptance. It also, the other issue besides whether it becomes a public street for acceptance is also, as Joe alluded to earlier, does it become a public facility? Maybe it's not, maybe we haven't taken all the actions that a court would find that require it to be a public street, that we've accepted into our street system, but it could be considered a public facility where we, just by maintaining it, where we'd have to do the, the maintenance obligation. I think what's highlighted by that case that the resident cited, all these streets are fact specific. All these cases are very fact specific of what constitutes a dedication, what constitutes an acceptance, what sort of behavior the public entity and the private individuals and the public engaged in over the years. And I think one of your commenters sent a late email today showing us the facilitation of the process in Orinda. And I actually had a chance to look at that information. I thought that was also very instructive because the city attorney there said the same thing I'm thinking. All these decisions, it's hard to craft a policy because it's all very fact specific of what constitutes acceptance and what would constitute an implied dedication.
Beach.
I've got a couple more questions that have occurred to me as we go through this. First of all, do we have a definition of a private street in our municipal codes anywhere?
No, we don't really. We do talk about alleyways being 25 feet in right of way, and then we talk about we only accept right of ways into the public town maintained road system that are at least 40 feet wide. Other than that, it's fairly silent.
And do we have any idea how many Ross residents live on private roads?
Not off the top of my head, but it's fairly easy to get that information off of our GIS program. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Joe, I had one question. When you're talking about the impact fees and that they can't be used on private roads, and then Councilmember Kershaw talked about the impact of the concrete truck on the private road. Well, that impact would be covered, or would that impact be covered by the fees assessed on the developer as part of the project?
I don't know if it's the fees. What I would think, if that private truck, if there's damage caused by it, and we do see, I think Rich could probably cite damage in private roadways by constructions, with that condition of approval, we pointed out in effect that the person doing the construction has to fix any damage. So for example, I think, Rich, you mentioned sometimes there's heavy things that the construction sits outside, and that if that damages the road, even in the private roadways, because the condition of approval we pass has to be fixed. So by documenting the roadway before with the video, any damage done in the private roadways, and there was one project on Crest, there were significant patches and repairs the development project did along of significant parts of the along the private roadway system to get there because of the condition approval. So we still have the condition of approval that if there's any damage that is noted with the construction, that gets repaired. And in effect, the contractor developer just does it out of funds. It's not out of any other source of funds. It's just additional cost to the project.
So there's no road impact fee for the private road, but there's a condition that the developer must repair afterwards any damage.
Correct.
Okay. Beach.
So the town enforces that. It's a provision that's put in the town's approval, and the town enforces the requirement that whoever did the damage repair the private road. Is that right?
Right, that's correct. So they videotape the conditions before, and then they, after construction, I have a dialogue with the owner or the applicant or the contractor that, you know, hey, and also part of the condition as well that we added is that they need to also consider the opinions of the condition of the road of the homeowners as well. It's a little vague, but we do throw that in there to give us a little bit more, to let the homeowners have their say too. We don't want to have the complete say on how to progress. So it's, you know, we can't enforce them to do it. They can say, no, we're not going to do it. Well, they're not going to get a final because they didn't meet all the conditions of approval. So that's the hammer that we have is, well, you want your project finalized, you have to meet this condition. So it's not truly control. It's a condition that they've accepted. When we put these conditions out there during the planning process, they can argue those conditions away. If they choose not to argue them away, they stay in with the project, and that is a condition of final approval.
But we do have a role then, don't we, in seeing that a private road is repaired if damaged?
We do have a role in it, yes.
Are there any other questions from council members of staff?
Councilmember Breckus has her hand up.
Sorry, Councilmember Breckus.
Yeah, I just wondered about the alternative council action that was listed of encouraging private roadway agreements. And I wondered if there was a way that we could, you know, as a condition of granting a permit to do renovation on a property that has a private road, if we could say, you know, you have to agree to sign on to a road maintenance agreement should, you know, I don't know, should the 50% of the residents on that roadway, you know, agree to form such a thing. Is there any way that we can put teeth behind our encouragement to residents to form road maintenance agreements? Because I know that's been really hard for this particular group that petitioned, I think they had a really long long way of, trying to get everybody to sign on to that.
So we could maybe condition if a road maintenance district exists, a pre-existing condition with like what's up on Ivy Drive. I'm not sure. I mean, that's kind of maybe a question for Ben, whether we can throw those type of conditions that you must join the existing road maintenance district or attempt to form a road maintenance district. It could be pretty clunky when you're trying to finalize your permit. So,
I mean, ultimately, the condition has to have a nexus to the impacts of the project. So we would have to establish what that nexus was in order to impose the condition. So it's definitely something to think about when those projects come forward. But I would have to understand what is the potential damage to the projects incurring that we're imposing this condition to establish the nexus.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? Then let's open it up to members of the public. Anyone can comment on this item. You have 3 minutes. Please introduce yourself. Town Clerk Linda Lopez will move you from the attendee to the panelist status so that you can be seen and heard. Please raise your hand if you'd like to do the raise hand icon on your Zoom meeting, and she'll be able to recognize you.
So I have brought in Andrea Elcourt.
Hi, this is Daniel Elcourt and my wife, Andrea. We live on 100 Ivy Drive, and thank you, Council, for having this session and discussing this issue. And thank you for considering the request of private road owners. I think I have a couple of observations, and I certainly appreciate the comments from some of the council members about probing both the fear of unknown and the risk of liability, as well as the fairness issues. On some level, Ivy Drive has a private volunteer road association, which raises funds annually to maintain and repair the road. And the reason that we submitted the letter to the town and think this issue is important is, on some levels, we've heard a lot of reasons why we can't do it, but we really haven't heard the town look into whether we should do it. And the first question, Beach raised, I think, was an excellent one, which is how many people actually live on private roads versus public roads. We all know that private road residents pay the same property taxes, they pay the same road impact fees, they pay the same gas taxes, they pay the same contributions to the town as public residents. And yet, as to some public service, because of arguments about potential acceptance or liability or prevailing wages or fiscal impact, there's been a flat rejection of any type of support, no matter how it might be structured. We think that the town can do better. And the Ivy Drive Road Association, for example, is not asking the town to fund the road repairs. They're not asking for the town to manage the road repairs. If we're asking the town to look to see if there's some mechanism where some of the value that the road residents pay in impact fees and taxes and others can be used to address some of the repairs of the road. Some of the things that the town mentioned, for example, the conditional use permit requiring repair, most residents on the road, and certainly in a community is responsible, as Ross, take care of the damage they cause. The damage is noticeable, and we live on the road. We're not going to leave our neighbors with damaged road conditions that we don't repair. The real issue is the structural damage to the road. And if you think about it, you normally pave a private road, maybe every 10 to 15 years, but with a lot of construction projects, you might have to pave it over 5 or 6 years, and potholes start to develop. That's not something that the CUP could address, because you won't be able to ask a resident who renovates their home and is the last contributor to a pothole to repave the road, or the last contributor to cracking up and down a quarter-mile stretch to repave it. So our ask is figure out how many homeowners live on private roads, figure out how much private residents contribute versus public residents. One argument I heard which has a superficial logic to it, which is, well, gee, private residents live way out there and they're causing the same damage to the public roads. That's true. But these fees and the cost that they pay are a socialized cost. We don't ask the resident who lives right next to the town to pay a fraction of the road
In
impact fee.
3 minutes, can you please wrap up your comments? It's been 3 minutes.
I feel like Vice President Pence here, sorry. I think what we're asking for is the town to look into this, to see if there's a fairness argument and come up with a solution that doesn't have the town funding the repairs or the maintenance, but does allow the private residents to have some benefit when they suffer damage to their private road caused by one of their residents' construction. Thank you
Thank
for
you
that.
very much. Linda, who is next?
I actually don't see any other raised hands. Oh, here we go.
And one thing, if you notice in the Department of Public Works, that's the timing system. So you can see it start at 3 minutes and go down to 0 so that you can have a sense of how much time you have left.
So we have Annika Nilsson.
Sorry, I'm Gina Nellison. I'm here with my daughter. She's one of the Girl Scouts attending this evening to learn about our government. I prepared something, but many of the points were already addressed. So a couple things that I thought about hearing you speak were, does the town receive a vehicle impact fee directly from Marin Sanitary in order to do business here on the roads?
Okay.
This isn't, I'm sorry, this is a time for public comment, but it's not a question and answer session. But maybe after your comments, there could be some replies from the staff.
Because I understand that the use of the refuse trucks is one of the greatest pressures on the road itself, and those fees that I think are collected by each town are put back to maintain the public roads only. If the town cannot assist private road residents as San Anselmo has done, then I think it needs to try to help homeowners limit their liabilities by not somehow allowing or advocating for public access. I see in the staff report that sometimes maybe the roads are publicly accessible, but this really exposes individual homeowners to liabilities that the public road residents are protected from. These are the same liabilities you seek to avoid. And should the council choose to leave maintenance responsibilities to homeowners, then I ask that you work to discourage public use, just as the city of Sausalito has done with Wolfback Ridge. This puts safety first, so that if private road residents need to evacuate quickly, they can do so without obstruction by public drivers looking to park or cut through. I believe this is a reasonable request for residents as well as the emergency responders who may need to use these roads because they're already steep and narrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Linda, do we have other speakers?
Yes, we do. Here we have Mishi Amarka.
Hi, this is Mishi Amarka and my wife, Haiti Tai, and we live at 58 Ivy. And I second what Daniel Elcourt said. And I also appreciate the town council for considering our request. I wanted to point out, and I read through the San Anselmo materials, and there's one thing that I wanted to point out that wasn't really discussed, but is evident from kind of the resolutions passed by the San Anselmo City Council, which is there's also an element of public benefit in ensuring that the private roads are appropriately maintained, including the fact when you look at the map, a lot of the private roads are really at the edge of the of the town and the kind of the wild life interface. And to the extent that fire and police and people can't access these roads because they're not in good condition, that's going to kind of create issues for the town as a whole. And, you know, same thing goes for drainage and other issues that arise with regards to private roads. So I think, you know, when weighing the benefits, you know, we can look at the downside of it, but we also need to look at the benefits of ensuring that the private roads are properly maintained. The other thing I wanted to say is I agree with Daniel that in terms of construction, I don't think I've ever seen anyone repair our road right after construction because the damage is not evident until it's really cumulative. And so, you know, to assess the damage from one construction project is not really realistic or meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Linda, do we have more speakers?
At this time, I do not see any raised hands. If anyone, oh, here we go. So we have Doug Sweeney.
Hi, it's actually Charlotte here with Doug Sweeney as well. And we're at 70 Ivy Drive in Ross. And I just wanted to say, kind of reiterate what everybody else has said, but I really appreciate that the council is taking up this matter. And we are just fully supportive of the comments that Daniel and Mishi have made. And, you know, we fully support you guys looking into this, and we would love to see some changes to this policy. So that's it, just brief. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to speak right now? Please raise your hand. I don't see any more.
All right, then let's bring it back to the council level. And council, I have to say, I only see part of you with each screen. I have to keep flipping back and forth. So if you've raised your hand, let me know or speak out. So I think that what's before us tonight is neighbors or residents of private roads have asked for consideration of funding for maintenance of those roads. The staff has put together a report explaining why their recommendation is to not go ahead with that. Issues of funding, liability, assuming that the ownership of the roads, pointing out that people know that they bought a private road. I suppose there's some benefits to a private road. It's quiet without traffic, but there are certainly some issues that we're hearing with some of the damage being done to private roads during construction projects that aren't covered by the road impact fee because that only covers the public roads. So there are a number of things to consider, but we have our staff report and a staff recommendation. Why don't we see what council members think about where this stands? Should it go anywhere? Do we stay with where we are with the staff report? What are the pros and cons of considering this more? So why don't you all weigh in and share your thoughts? And whoever wants to go first should just speak up.
Well, I'll start.
Hey, Beach.
As I indicated in my questions, I see an argument that the homeowners on the private roads have, that why should they pay the same amount of impact fee as do those on the public roads who apparently or may get more benefit from those impact fees than those on the private roads. as I also think I indicated, there are some more things I'd like to know. I'd like to see us explore further, if there's some way to do it, whether there is some equitable action that we could take to provide some relief. But I don't have a very good idea other than what that relief might be, other than what I think I suggested in my questions is maybe those on the private roads, because they get less benefit, should pay less, a smaller percentage impact, maybe 50% or 0.5% instead of 1% by way of an impact fee. I'm not suggesting that that's the right number, but something like that maybe we could do. I have some questions whether that would be legal. I just don't know. But I don't want, I would be reluctant to see us just drop the issue without exploring it further, but I'm unable to suggest with any certainty what further explanation we might do, frankly.
Beach, could I just try to make a comment? If the suggestion is to have less of a road impact fee, the construction vehicles for the private road projects use the public roads as much as the construction vehicles for the public road project. So they do have the same benefit of the impact fee. The vehicles they have the same use of public roads, and they have the same benefit because those are the roads that are repaired with that fee. Isn't that correct?
Maybe somebody other than I ought to, who has a better sense of it ought to answer, because maybe you're right. I was thinking that a large part of the damage occurs at the site of the particular construction activity.
But that is paid for not by the road impact fee, no matter how much that fee is. My understanding is that's paid for by the developer after the project when the road is videotaped again.
I think you're right.
I think there is a local impact from construction that, in addition to visible damage to the roadway, knocking over a fire hydrant, leaving a pothole, is more of a gradual, as one speaker said, cumulative effect. So you might have to repave a road every 10 years without any construction vehicles, but if you have a lot of construction activity, maybe you find yourself repaving it or resurfacing it every 5 years. That's why I started with the question that I had about, is there any way to break this down in terms of the impact on public roads versus the last part of the trip that might be on a private road? And I agree with Beach. I think there is possibly some sort of equitable or fairness issue here. I just don't think we have sufficient information to evaluate this in terms of what we might do. I mean, we don't have any facts and figures that are specific. We have general concepts, but not any facts and figures. What I would like to know as a council member, for example, is if we were going to contribute something, how much money are we talking about? You know, is it $50,000? Is it $10,000? Is it $1 million? I don't really know. I don't have any sense of how much the town collects in terms of impact fees or what the town spends on repairs and maintenance that is attributable to construction impacts as opposed to general use. And I'm not being critical about this. It might be difficult to get that information. Maybe it's just not feasible to get that kind of information, but frankly, it's difficult to be specific when we don't have specific information. And so while I do think there's a fairness issue, I'm a bit at a loss as to how to remedy that, assuming it's appropriate to remedy it. And I do think we have to be cognizant of maybe perhaps not intentionally, maybe unintentionally, getting into some situation where suddenly we have a much greater responsibility than we thought we were taking on. We have additional liability, we have additional responsibility for road maintenance. My general sense is that it would be possible to come up with something that creates enough distance between us and whatever entity or group or association is actually doing the work to protect us from liability. I'm a little more troubled by Ben's comments about, well, what about prevailing wage laws and so forth? That really gets us into the thicket with other unintended consequences. So I'm certainly open to any specific suggestions, but while I think there may be an issue here, I don't really have anything specific to propose.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Well, I think that Bill and Beach said it really well in a lot of ways about the issues, because I understand it. I do, it is a hard thing because there is an equity argument in that, you could say that somebody that lives right on the public road, right as you enter the town, is paying just as much as someone that lives deeper into town. And yet, as town residents, aren't we all benefiting from the town streets being well maintained? Or for that matter, somebody on the creek who's paying for the retaining walls of, creek property, town gets the benefit of the water flowing through, as it should. And yet that resident buys knowing they're going to have to maintain a retaining wall. And so maybe it's somewhat like that in terms of buying on a private road. I have, been involved in a landslide in San Selmo where the residents got the benefit of this road impact, and I know it was very helpful. And yet I think some of these legal issues are really, and the prevailing wage one is one that, really could add to the cost of residents doing a project. And so that would be a real negative for those residents that they might not think of. There was one comment made about, could the town encourage private roads to stay private? I'm familiar with, a private road in Tiburon, and they do close their road twice a year to assert the privateness of the road and make sure that they can control that access. I mean, they can't prevent public rights that have already been acquired, but in that situation, they do assert ownership. So I think that's a little bit of a different issue. I think of all the ideas of, could we contribute, that seems to possibly have merit is this idea of, and I think Beach, you might have said it was, well, what if we, instead of collecting the entire amount of a road impact from a fund, from a project, you collect some amount. I don't know if I'd say 50% is the right amount, because I think that, like we just discussed, that the road impacts are getting covered for the damage of these cars coming through. And so that doesn't seem like the right amount. And then, if that money isn't going into some private road maintenance agreement, kitty, why are we going to give somebody a discount on that? And I do like the idea of trying to encourage people to get into these roadway maintenance agreements. And, and I don't know whether or not there's something that we could do further to do that, or if that becomes problematic, but I wouldn't mind if that's something people wanted to think about or look at. Maybe it's something we could do, because the law is really clear that everyone's supposed to pay for road maintenance. And yet, when people are difficult about it, residents just kind of give up and then pay more than their fair share. So, I appreciate the deep dive we're doing into this, because I think there are some good points being made and issues. And I'm glad that we're looking at it deeper. I just, like the other council members who spoke, I'm not sure exactly where we go from here.
Yeah, where to go? I mean, the staff has gone in one direction, which is they pointed out that the road impact fees, can't be used for the private road. the neighbors or the private road residents have pointed out that sometimes the damages aren't totally covered by the developer. Maybe there's a way for the, when there's a project on a private road, perhaps there's a way for, besides immediate damages being repaired, there's a way to put aside a certain amount of money in that neighborhood's road, neighborhood association fee for the next paving. And if it comes a little bit earlier because of the construction, well, then people who have done construction on that private road will have contributed more to that paving fee because they've contributed more when they did their project. That might help a little bit with some of the concerns about the private roads having some wear and tear that, might not show up immediately after a project is finished. So that might be a way, if it's legal, to assess more than to have the developer pay, not just for immediate repairs, but also a certain amount to the private road association paving kitty to have that available. That might be a way to address some of the concerns. I think that, in my opinion, for some of the others, can we use general fund money? I worry about that. I tend to agree with the staff report that it's not clear if it's fair. People who live on private roads know that they're private, expect to pay for it, get certain benefits because they're quiet streets without traffic. And if the town starts to use general funds for some of these streets, it does sound as though the town could be taking on real liability and real ownership of roads, many of which need, well, if it was to be brought up to town standards, extensive work because they're not nearly 40 feet wide and perhaps can't be made 40 feet wide. So I don't know that I would take it any further than trying to work on construction fees for projects on private roads to try to help with some of the late damages. But there may be ways of looking at this and finding some other ways to help out. It's kind of unclear, how you help a private road. How does the public help the private? It's a little, it's a little inappropriate. Beach, you were going to say something?
Yes, I was going to suggest that maybe what we ought to do for now is ask our staff to take another look at this issue, having in mind some of the things that they've heard tonight, to see if that changes their thinking at all about whether there is some way we can try to deal with what appears to be an inequity. I also would suggest that if we're going to do that, we indicate to the staff that it should be a low priority project for them to conduct this further consideration, because I think we've got other things now and coming up in the next few months that are much more critical for the town to resolve than this issue.
Bill and Elizabeth, what do you think of that approach?
I think that's a good approach, and perhaps included in that further consideration by the staff would be some comment on whether there are ways that the town, if it wanted to, could make a contribution in a way that maximized our avoidance of taking on extra liability. I don't feel I stated that very well, but I think everybody knows we really don't need any additional liabilities at this point in time. But is there some way to do this that doesn't create other problems? I'd also, if to the extent the staff is able to opine on that, some further input on this prevailing wage issue. Are we creating problems for ourselves? Are we creating problems for residents that that might come as a unwelcome surprise.
And Councilmember Breckus?
Yeah, I'm supportive of that. I think that, you know, if we were going to look at, you know, hey, you're doing a project up on Ivy and, you know, you don't pay 10% or 15% of the road impact funds because that money is going to get put into the Ivy kitty. If there's a way to do that, then I think we really would need to understand the dollars and cents of that and the impact of like what amount of money are we talking about, and then how are we handling that? What is it costing the town? So we understand that, you know, and I think that I'm also prepared to have this discussion and feel like we need to stay the course of where we're at now because, you know, I don't know if it is a huge benefit to residents on a private road if really now what they're complaining about is the individual expense of having to maintain these private roads, and what we're doing is adding expense. I don't know if that's a benefit to them or not. So I think that has to be considered. But I'm not against looking at it. I also would agree that we need to balance what staff has on their plate with it coming back to us. And to the extent people want to weigh in on this issue of, you know, we heard a little bit about it, that the private roadways agreements are something that they'd like to see the town encourage. And I don't know, I guess I've heard a little bit about the Winship Park one. It might be interesting to hear whether this is an issue for other neighborhoods. But, you know, maybe the people who are on this call and feel, you know, wanted to raise this with us could also talk, in consideration of what we said, could, you know, make some proposals or explain their thoughts on it.
So you would be in favor of having staff look at this more and then bringing it back to the council?
For another discussion, yes, I would.
Joe, does that give you enough direction?
Yeah, I'm looking at my team, the public works director and town attorney. So
I have a couple of questions based on your comments. So I understand Councilmember Kirschner's comment about looking at how to minimize our role and our liability, which to me is looking at the San Anselmo model and perhaps making it stronger for us, where we give money and we provide protections for the town for that money. So that's kind of one tree that I you know, and deals with the prevailing wage issue to the extent we can deal with that. So that's kind of one area that's pretty, you know, straightforward at what to do a deeper dive on. On this concept of the impact fee, I'm a little confused because if we want to offer a discount with the impact fee, you're allowed to offer discounts of impact fees for certain class of groups, but you have to hire, you know, do a cost of service analysis, and in order to tweak your fee to create subgroups. And I think the disconnect I'm trying to wrap my head around, this fee was established by looking at all the public roads and dividing that number up to all the residents, because all the residents use the public roads. It didn't look at all the public roads and private roads and divide that number up. And so there's some sort of amount in there embedded that related to private roads. So if we went and wanted to somehow offer a discount on that, I think the only way we could justify that as a policy perspective is to do a cost of service analysis, but I don't think that cost of service analysis would give some sort of discount to private versus public. I think what would be more likely is locations within the town create zones. So, you know, I don't know how much more we can do on that issue. I do like the issue raised by the Vice Mayor, Elizabeth Robbins, about looking at the idea of a condition of approval and requiring a condition of approval for projects that are on these private roads to provide some sort of monetary amount that we would have to calculate that would have a nexus for any damage on those private roads. I'm not sure how we would do that, but that's something we could research to figure out what that would look like and have it triggered maybe on those private road associations having the mechanism to accept that amount. So those are my thoughts. I just want to throw it out there because I'm not really sure what we could do with the impact fee. I think from all of our research, when cities like San Anselmo want to do something about this, they target the general fund money because that's where it's just more flexible.
I agree
So
mostly
are we
with,
all okay with not targeting the impact fee then? It sounds like it really can't be done.
well, I think you should get away from the idea of using the impact fee or coming up with a credit or anything like that, and stick maybe with the idea of the general fund. And maybe, you know, what the town attorney suggests, I think those are doable tasks that staff can take a look at. But maybe what we want to do is really take a look at the mechanics of the San Anselmo model. I mean, how much do they set aside each year? How do they, when a project comes along, how do they, how do they bring that? Do they bring it to council and say, well, these 4 streets would like a little bit of money, but we have this maybe $100,000 of discretionary money that we've set up, which would itself, that whole process would require another council action. And just look at the San Anselmo model. Maybe we can come back with a little bit more information on the mechanics of that and the risks and liabilities associated with it, and the question of the prevailing wage.
I guess I don't want to sound like someone who's, like overly concerned about doing anything, but if we're looking to San Anselmo, I mean, we should probably look to the other towns in Marin and ask why aren't they doing anything? Because it is interesting that only San Anselmo has any provisions for this, and none of the other towns do. And I suspect they've all been approached for something similar. So I think we should know, we should know a little bit more about not just what San Anselmo is doing, but what some of the other towns aren't doing and why.
Yeah, I was deputy road commissioner for the County of Marin for about 4 years. And boy, the County of Marin does not, it doesn't even get to the Board of Supervisors level. It barely gets to the Public Works Director level. It's more a divisional level of, there's no way that any funds or any sort of maintenance money, general fund or whatever, goes to private streets at all. The county was very adamant about that. So just that as a model kind of shows you that and the fact that none of the other towns, as Joe was saying, have entertained any of that. It's all because of the implied liability and the continual maintenance responsibilities that may come about of it. So.
And it's the cost to the general fund. Several in the survey of the Marin manager said, kind of like Rich said, there's no way that's going anywhere. And so they said, yeah, I got a request last week. And the other said, I got one 2 weeks ago from private road people. But it's just what's the liability and the cost, and you're using your general fund. And I guess that's a question for council. Do you want to use your general fund to do this? Now, my understanding is San Anselmo, how they did it, they passed a tax measure and they set a part of the tax measure the annual proceeds up to $100,000 a year from a tax they passed, a new sales tax. So they're not using their base general fund, they're using past taxes that they passed by the voters. So the question is, this council, you know what the call is on the general fund, and obviously we have a public safety tax that we need to get renewed. So do you want to use general fund dollars, or is it, as the town attorney was saying, and I think Elizabeth Robbins, find a way to add another component on the private? Is there a way to get a surcharge, so to speak, on the private roadway developers to fund for their road associations? But I guess I don't want to spend a lot. The source of fund here would have to be general fund. I mean, quite clear, and you're going to take a liability. So no, this is general fund dollars. And then how are you going to say which roadways get it? So it's how much is council willing to spend general fund dollars, or should we explore these other things of strengthening the associations of finding a mechanism there?
Councilmember Breckus?
Well, I think that's right about the road impact. And so I think that, the issue should be looking at encouraging road maintenance agreements and, perhaps talking to these groups and seeing what we're doing about when people do a project. And probably not fair to use the term developer, probably more fair to say homeowner or developer. But, in that situation, is videotaping the road as a condition of approval the limit and what we're doing. But then the other thing is, I would like to understand how they're paying for street cleaning, because I do feel like there is street cleaning going on in these private roads, and I'm curious how that's working.
So what are we asking staff to do then?
My suggestion would be, given the liability that we are dealing with, and essentially just to come back and give us advice on what we can do to require the private projects to be funding appropriately to help the private road people cover the expenses. And, a video of the road may not really be it because of the fact that they're, taking wear and tear on the road that's not visible at the end of a project.
Okay. Beach and Bill, do you agree that's what we'll be asking staff to look into?
I'd just like them to take cognizance of the things that they've heard tonight and see if that suggests anything new to them that can help fix up what appears to be an inequity in that these people pay the same amount of impact fee and perhaps and arguably do not get the same amount of benefit as others.
Okay.
I mean, I recognize that these private streets were initially established so that, number one, they could have a road that did not meet the standards of the town would require for a public road, and two, it gives them some more privacy. So they do have some benefits, I think, that come from these living on these private roads, but that's got to be balanced against the inequity. And with everything that you heard, do you think there's something that we could and should do to try and do away with this inequity?
And Councilmember Kircher, any other requests of staff?
Oh, I would like to see any additional report address the two issues I mentioned earlier, which is if the town were inclined to make some sort of a financial contribution from whatever source, not impact fees, but some funding mechanism, to what extent can the town protect against liability for its financial contribution, and to what extent would there be problems either for the town or for those who are the beneficiaries of that contribution in terms of prevailing wage laws?
All right. So Rich and Joe, does that give you enough to work on now?
I think so, yes. Got it. So,
all right. Thank you very much. let's move on to the next item, and Mayor McMillan will rejoin us.
Here I am. The next item is number 12, Town Council consideration of introduction of ordinance number 708, an ordinance of the Town of Ross amending Ross Municipal Code 18.12 definitions, Chapter 18.40 general regulations, Chapter 18.41 design review, Chapter 18.42 accessory dwelling units, and Chapter 18.52 non-conforming structures and uses. Patrick.
Thank you, Mayor McMillan, members of the council. As was introduced, this item is a set of proposed amendments to the zoning code. So we do have a zoning code that was the first comprehensive zoning code was established in 1961, and it's meant to be updated from time to time as technologies change, as entitlement pathways change. So as you can tell from the slide, we've made changes over the years to things like floor area ratio, creating new types of entitlements, new things that are under discretion in front of the council, and then also creating different levels of review for components of a project, as well as making changes to the zoning code to bring it into compliance with the government code that's issued by the state. So the last time that a comprehensive look was taken by the council at the zoning code was in December of 2018. And there were 10 recommendations for future amendments to the zoning code. The council discussed them briefly and then directed staff to return with these items in kind of smaller clusters to be addressed by the council. So of those 10 items, a few of them have been addressed by the council already in the intervening 2 years. One is the setting maximum standards for ADUs. That's kind of been taken care of already by updates that have come from the state and then the town's implementation of those state codes. Additionally, the topic of design review for cumulative work over a 3-year period. So basically projects that are subject to building permits, we don't issue additional building permits consecutively unless there's 9 months between them. However, if there's a project that is not subject to the town's discretion, for instance, a small addition to the house and then a small change to landscaping, those projects could be taking place in succession with those 9-month gaps, but in total, they would have equated to be something that would have required town review. So for instance, design review. So that idea of creating mandatory design review for cumulative work that passes that threshold was presented as an idea. At that meeting, more than one council member said they would not be supportive of that new entitlement requirement. So staff is not recommending that we make changes at this time. Additionally, there were recommended changes to clean up the language in the definitions chapter. Those are presented tonight. Waiving a requirement for minor exceptions for changes to basements and attics, for instance, putting in new windows and things like that, things that don't change the floor area. That has already been addressed by the council. Design review for changes to roof height, having that be a requirement, that has been addressed by the council. Waiving design review for creek stabilization projects. The council has already taken that action as well. Then was presented was the idea of incorporating our lighting standards. So right now for projects that do require some sort of discretionary action, so design review or a use permit, we have lighting standards that are in effect, but for projects that would otherwise be ministerial, so just building permits, we'd like to apply those lighting standards so that they're consistent with our design review chapter. So that is before the council tonight as part of this package. Additionally, there was a conversation about guest houses, putting a cap on the size, eliminating the use permit requirement. Again, the ADU legislation accomplishes a lot of those suggestions. And at this time, staff feels that guest houses that won't be used for providing additional housing, so a guest house that is not going to be used as an ADU should still be subject to the more strict requirements. So at this time, staff is not recommending any changes to the way that the code is written. Home occupancy permits, making that easier for homeowners to work from home. Occupation permits, that has already been addressed by the council. And then also the use of RV vehicles, either for residents or for construction office, for new construction or for major renovations. And we'll talk about that a little bit further in the presentation. Also at that meeting, it was not one of these 10 zoning amendment suggestions, but it was raised by the council and by a member of the council and seconded, was the idea of creating a pilot program for a minor nonconformity permit. So right now for projects that are legal nonconforming, to do any change to them requires that the project go back in front of the council for a public hearing. So this would create an approach for very minor projects that were not likely to have impacts on neighboring properties to be addressed at the administrative level by staff. And so we'll discuss that a little further in the presentation as well. So getting down to the proposed changes in the definitions chapter, one of the changes is to have a consistent definition of a finished basement. So right now there are references to 5 feet and to 7 feet ceiling heights. The building code standard for a habitable floor in a residential building is 7 feet. So this proposed change would just bring everything to be consistent with the building code and throughout our zoning code. Also, we have a definition of creeks, but it does not include how to measure setbacks, which is the most important part of development adjacent to a creek. So this creates that measurement standard, which is from the top of bank, and that's determined by the town engineer.
Can I ask a question of you, Patrick?
Sure.
I'm trying to follow along under the staff report. I thought the staff report got redlined so that all of the changes were supposed to be in red, but maybe that was sent to us later, so it's not in the staff line online. It's the one that got sent to us later. Is that right?
There's an attachment to the staff report that has all of the changes. The staff report has red lines, but it's examples of the types of changes that are being recommended.
So if I scroll, there's 55 pages of the staff report. Mm-hmm. It's one of those attachments.
Yes, but also the ordinance that is attached to the staff report, which was sent out later and since been updated, the ordinance does have as an exhibit all of those red lines as well.
Okay.
So if you're scrolling through a single PDF, you should have the staff report, which is 8 pages.
Okay.
That should be followed by the ordinance, which.
But that's not redlined, right?
Ordinance is not redlined.
I'm looking for something that's redlined, and I should go to what you sent out.
Yes. So there's.
Isn't it attachment 3 that's redlined? So
the attachment 3 is redlined, as is the ordinance. So there are 2 different documents that include the full redlined version of the zoning text.
Okay. I'm not seeing in that attachment 3, and maybe I'm missing it, the finished basement definition change. Mm-hmm. Under 8.12, can you tell me what that is?
Yes, so we were able to accomplish that change by, I believe it was floor area. That was the definition, that amending that brought everything into consistency.
I see. Okay, I got it. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so getting back to the definition. So we have a definition for parking space. It does not include dimensions, which is a common question with development. So this creates a standard dimension for parking spaces. That's a 9 by 18 is a well-accepted standard for a parking space. Also, there's confusion between our definition section and in the residential, the R1 district zoning code section, where it talks about requiring enclosed parking. And so there have been questions as to, does that mean just a carport? Is it covered parking, or is it specifically enclosed? So staff is recommending the more conservative approach, which would be that it's got a permanent fixed roof, as well as walls that block the parking space from the public view. And lastly, the terms yard and setback are used interchangeably throughout the zoning code. Basically, a front setback or a front yard mean the same thing. So this just creates that that definition so that there's one place to look to realize that. Moving into the next chapter, which is general regulations. This is where there's a more substantial change to the code being proposed. So the use of recreational vehicles. Right now, they are not permitted to be used for habitation or for construction offices. So this provision would allow, with a use permit that would be set to expire within 2 years of issuance or 30 days after the close of the associated construction project. And so a use permit is fully discretionary. The council would be able to put conditions on that, such as screening or use of the facility. But it would allow those to be used as construction offices for major remodels or rebuilds, which would have an environmental benefit in reducing the amount of trips to a location. It could also be used as habitation for the people that are waiting for their home to be either reconstructed or constructed in the first place. In my experience with Santa Rosa, that had a very important resiliency effect. When people lost their homes to the fires, they were able to stay on their property as opposed to having to find hotels elsewhere. So there is a sustainability or a resiliency impact associated with that. And it is subject to a use permit. So it would be at the council's discretion whether or not the needs of the applicant requesting to stay in an RV on their property amounts to such a level that the council would wish to grant it. But it's a major change from the existing standards. So it is something for the council to consider. Additionally, with the lighting, this is just simply bringing it into compliance with our design review standards. They're applicable to any project that has a yes or no on it. The downward shielding of lighting is not applicable to projects that only require a building permit. So this would have everything be consistent through all types of projects moving forward. And it would have an environmental benefit in that it would reduce the amount of glare and light pollution from projects moving forward. Projects that have uplighting currently would become legal non-conforming, so there would be no penalty if you do have uplighting on your property. But if you were to do a project in the future, we would require all the lighting to be downward facing and shielded. The updates to the accessory dwelling units chapter. Again, these are just cleanup items. There's no substantial change to what's outlined in this chapter. I have an example on this slide, which is that in our table of the maximum allowed floor area, we had said that it was, for instance, 1 bedroom, 850 square feet, or 50% of the dwelling unit, whichever is greater. So that creates this minimum standard on square footage, which could be misinterpreted and doesn't give us any control on the size of an ADU. So this just cleans up the language, whichever is less, meaning that this is the maximum size that you're guaranteed to be able to build your ADU without going to council for a determination. So it's language cleanup like that throughout the ADU chapter. There's no level of increased permissiveness for the chapter. It's remaining as conservative as it was originally adopted by the council. And then the final update that is in front of you tonight is an update to chapter 1852, which talks about non-conforming structures and uses. So this creates a new type of permit. It's modeled very similarly to the minor exception permit, which basically allows for a non-conforming structure to be modified through the issuance of a minor non-conformity permit, as opposed to a non-conformity permit, which requires council action. And the 2 criteria that staff is recommending for this are the most conservative. So it is up to the council if the council wishes to eliminate these or modify these, that is at your discretion. But staff wanted to put forth the most conservative at this time, which is there's no change to floor area, and the structure, the change that's being proposed is not immediately visible from the public way or from immediately adjacent properties. So for instance, if someone wants to put a door on their back porch and their back porch is non-conforming, or they want to move around the orientation of windows, and there's no realistic impact to the views from neighboring properties, this is something that could be accomplished at the staff level. As soon as it gets up to the level of including an addition or something that may have a visual impact to a neighbor, then it goes through the normal or the regular town council process of going in front of the council for consideration of a nonconformity permit. It would include a 10-day notice, which is standard to all adjacent property owners. So they would have the opportunity to raise opposition. They'd also have the opportunity to request a public hearing for this action as opposed to administrative action by the town planner. And that action is appealable up to the town council. Additionally, the town planner would have the right to elevate any project that looks like it should be in front of the council for consideration. That's a path that it could take as well. So there's no requirement that it has to be decided at the administrative level. It could just be elevated to council based on feedback from the neighbors or the town planner's interpretation of what's being asked. And lastly, this would be a one-year pilot program. So it'll be back in front of the council after a year from implementation. And if the council likes the way that it looks and that it's working, it can choose to continue it for perhaps for another one-year period or indefinitely, or we could end the program at that time. So all of these changes are exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. There's no potential for changes to the environment. Any projects that are proposed that are in line with the zoning code would be subject to CEQA on their own merits. And additionally, a lot of these changes are just bringing our code into compliance with the state code. So the recommendation of staff at this time is that the council introduce ordinance number 708, which would amend the Ross Municipal Code for the chapters that were discussed in this presentation. And staff is available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Questions from council?
I have a question.
Elizabeth.
Well, first off, I just wondered on the definition section for parking space. I wasn't sure when I read that whether you were including carports or not. I thought maybe you were saying, oh, maybe it could be a carport as long as you can't see it. But you're saying carports never apply. Is that right? And if so, would it make sense to say not just roofed structure, because carports generally have roofs, but enclosed with walls? And I mean, I don't know. I thought I wasn't sure from that reading whether what you meant.
Yeah, so the intent was really that you're providing some sort of horizontal screening in addition to the roof. So the single family residential section of the code does talk about a permanent roofed structure, and it says it's enclosed. So staff's interpretation was that by saying it's enclosed, you're creating some sort of screening. And so that's why the definition says adequately screens the vehicle from public view. So that could be a carport with landscaping, perhaps, some sort of screening, but the idea is that you're not looking at a parked vehicle.
Okay.
So that's the intention behind that definition.
So like the picture that's up on the screen that I don't know if it shuts down, but that could be adequate because it does screen that car for the most part.
Correct.
Okay. And then under recreational vehicles, it seemed like there's no rule as to whether or not, I mean, it deals with habitation and construction, but say somebody wanted to get a RV and park it in front of their house and then and they met the 15 feet off and they wanted to have their kids homeschooled in it or just, have an extra space for their family. It didn't seem like we were regulating that. I was wondering if that is your interpretation.
Well, we do allow for people to store RVs on their property. and however they use those RVs. We don't necessarily have an enforcement mechanism other than if someone is living in an RV on their property and we receive a complaint, we can send code enforcement. But if people do want to homeschool their children in an RV and they're meeting all the other standards in our code, I don't think we have any control over that.
Except for changing our code so that that's not allowed, but you're saying that right now that's not anything we've ever done.
Correct. So yeah, the changes that are recommended here are only regarding the use of the RV as a construction office or as habitation while a house is undergoing major renovations. There are certainly several other types of uses that could be discussed by the council, but that was not in the scope of this update.
Okay. And then on the nonconformity structure, I know I talked to you offline about this, but well, the thing I talked to you offline about it was just the issue of that it's only allowed if you can't see it from any adjacent or public space. And I guess my question and the reason I asked that item particularly be brought is because the example I gave to the council when I was raising it was the fact that my understanding was that my roof eaves are 38 feet from, or my building is 38 feet from back and therefore non-conforming. So I can't add roof eaves to the back of my property, which I thought was kind of crazy because they'd be visible to my neighbors, but they'd be improvement. I think that when there was a project by Yandel on the corner of Woodside and Lagunitas, and there was a pool that made them go through a design review, but then there was also a little trellis, pretty kind of trellis thing near their outdoor living space that just was decorative. And I don't know how visible that was from offsite. I just can't recall, but that would be another one where, it seems like it would have to go before us if it was just really non-essential improvement, but it was visible. So I'm just wondering, that provision is one that you said that you put in just to be the strictest and not for any other reason, just to decide if that's what the council wanted to go with. Is that right?
That's correct. So that is a question, up in front of the council if they'd like this to be less strict. Staff proposed the most strict requirements.
Okay, and then the other one, that total floor area, I didn't quite understand. I thought I was reading it almost as saying like, if you exceeded floor area, then you can't even apply for this thing. But you're saying, no, it only comes into play if the requested change is to add floor area. Is that right?
Yes, so the two standards under, or the two criteria under 045B say that there's no change being proposed to floor area. So if a structure, so let's say it's a house, is already non-conforming with their floor area and they wanted to make changes to that structure and there wasn't any change to the floor area, that could still be processed through this minor permit. If they did want to add a porch or a deck or a balcony, then it would not qualify because it would not be consistent with number one of those two criteria, and therefore it would be subject to the standard nonconformity permit in front of the council.
Well, when you say a deck or a balcony, some of those don't count as floor area.
Yes, but we're pretty conservative in Ross as far as what does count as floor area. And so yes, there are some exceptions that would not be floor area. For instance, the other definition that we did for basement storage space does not count as floor area if it's not usable basement space. So those types of changes could avoid having to go to the council level and could be processed at the staff level.
Okay. All right, I think that's it for right now. Thank you.
Anybody else? Patrick, I just had a question just looking at this now. It just, for the notice on the minor nonconformity permit, which is B2E, It seems like so many people are out of town right now. And if you gave someone 10 days notice by mail, I'm not sure people are going to get it because there's so many people out of town. I don't know how you remedy that. And also, I was thinking, it seems like people across the street should also receive notice, not just the neighbors adjacent to the project, so that kind of everyone that's going to be affected by the project knows in advance, and if they have a problem, then they can express their concern.
Well, to address the adjacency, street center line does count as adjacent. So neighbors across the street would be included in that noticing. And then, yeah, as far as the best way that we have to notice right now is through mailed notice. And so there is the potential that people may miss that 10-day period. 10 days notice is the going standard, generally for land use. But we could, for instance, create a page on the website of upcoming actions, something like that. Another place where future actions are going to be posted. For instance, in Santa Rosa, a lot of the administrative decisions are made by the zoning administrator at a regularly scheduled meeting that occurs twice a month. And so we could just have when the town planner is going to make these decisions could be on set days that occur maybe once or twice a month. And those actions would be posted to the town website in addition to the mail notice that went out. So that is something we could do to just improve the canvassing of notice.
Do we keep email? Sorry. Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. You woke everyone up. Do we keep emails in our town records based on addresses, or is it just based on residents' names? Do you know?
The email addresses, I don't believe we have based on addresses.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other questions by the council? All right. Any comments by the public?
Patrick, can you shut the screen so I can see?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't see any raised hands.
Okay, then we'll bring it back for discussion. I am prepared to go ahead and accept and approve these changes. Does anyone disagree with that?
I agree. I think that's fine. And it's just I think it's fine. I think it's helpful that the minor nonconformity is a 1-year pilot. It gives us a chance to see if it works. It might be a real benefit to everybody. So I think that could be really helpful.
Great. So maybe we could have a motion.
I think Elizabeth Breckus is trying to speak, but she's muted.
Oh, she's
muted. Excuse me.
Oh, her phone derailed her.
Uh-oh.
I'm sorry, I can't see anybody's picture anymore. I don't know why.
We hear you.
We can see you too, so.
Okay, all right, there we go. I'm sorry about that. My kids have been using my computer and all my settings are different than normal. I just want to propose that the change that, or that not the change, but the provision that you can't see it from any other property be reconsidered, because number one, the nonconformities in our town are usually streets like Bolinas or Poplar, or the homes that are close together. And so basically you are taking away a bunch of ability for any of those properties that have high visibility from their neighbors to take advantage of this. You're left with homes like that have larger lots and that do have visibility from don't have visibility from adjacent. So I think it's going to be of limited use. If we do decide to go ahead with that provision, then I just would suggest in a year when we bring it back, we look at that and decide, look, did anybody take advantage of this, or did we really kind of derail it with this limited use? Because in my mind, it's sort of a limited use when you put that provision in, and it's also kind of harsh to exactly the properties that you might have wanted to intend it for, i.e. properties that are, quote, highly non-conforming, which, some of those streets are where those properties are.
I think that's a good point, Elizabeth, except I think I might disagree because first, it seems like almost everyone's house is non-conforming, even the houses, on Bolinas. And if it's only for a year, I do like the idea of looking at the end of a year and seeing, how important was it to have it not visible, and how many people had to come before the council who really we could have just left that to the discretion of the town planner. And maybe after a year, we get rid of that provision if it's too onerous.
Well, I just want to point this out, which is like, I chose not to come before the council because I didn't want to do it. I'm not going to add that time, expense, and pain to do it. So I think that if you're going to do that, you need to not consider, oh, remember all those people that came before the council and we shouldn't have done it, because those are the projects you'll never see. So I'm not discouraging you to vote as you think is the appropriate way. I'm just saying I don't think that's the best metric, because I don't think you'll ever see those projects.
If I may, Mayor and Council, I did, Matthew just pointed me to in our minor exception section. We do allow minor visual changes with written consent of adjacent neighbors. So I'm having trouble finding that exact code section, so I don't have the language for you right now. But that is something that potentially before a year's time, we could add this to that code section as a small update item, just to include something along those lines.
I'd like to just be heard on that particular item. I think we had this on another one where we learned that we had a written consent of adjacent neighbor provision, and I believe those are highly illegal. I've researched this very closely, as Ben might know, because he might have heard of it, and was prepared to file a writ of mandate on that issue. And so I'm quite confident that that would not withstand legal scrutiny, nor should it, because one neighbor should not, be the great neighbor who gets to say yes, and that neighbor, the applicant gets to do one thing and the other neighbor doesn't. It's not kind of what we've done in Ross historically, where we've said, look, you can live next door to the biggest jerk and with the loudest voice, and you'll get the same as the person who is the most popular in the neighborhood. So I get that as a solution, but unfortunately, I don't think it's a great one.
I respectfully retract that suggestion.
I would even go one further and move us away from neighbors' comments on projects. We have neighbors signing yes, I agree, or no, I don't, when I think it would be better if neighbors could go to town planners and offer comments, and not have to go on record as not approving or not liking a neighbor's project. It just starts a civil war in the neighborhood. But back to your project, Elizabeth, where you didn't go before the council because it was so minor. Patrick, is the wording, could the wording be so that if it's something as minor as what Elizabeth brings up, it could be approved? Tweak the wording so it says, is largely not visible or has, essentially no impact or something. And then the sort of thing Elizabeth was talking about could go through, but it would still be, there wouldn't be a major change that could concern the neighbors.
Well, the language does say readily visible, which does create some level of interpretation. I think what Councilmember Breckus was saying, though, it would be highly visible. It's just that it would be favored by the neighbors. In which case, my caution is that there could be something that's highly visible that the homeowner thinks might be embraced by the neighbors, but there might be some opposition, which is why this is as conservative as possible. But it may discourage some people from even seeking a nonconformity permit in the first place. So we may not have that information when we do reach that 1-year review.
Okay.
I think the readily visible from a public right-of-way or to an adjacent property owner does create some discretion for the staff, but I wonder if it goes far enough. I mean, I agree, the term readily is subject to varying interpretations, but a very conservative construction of readily means you don't have to climb a ladder or something like that. I'm thinking in particular of this project. Was it on Madeira? The owners wanted to add a cover to a deck.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some conversations with the owner about that, about what they went through to get the approval and the amount of money they spent on architects and planning and so forth, because they had to go back before design review, I think more than once, and then before the town council to add a deck cover. And I don't recall the specifics, but the amount of money they spent just on professional fees was quite large in proportion to the cost of the entire project. I do think if you were looking for that type of thing from the street, you would see something that looked like a cover of a deck, but it was readily visible, but it wasn't, I don't think, significant. Of course, it hadn't been built when I went to the residence, but as built, I think it probably would have not had any substantial visual impact one way or another, which is perhaps another way of saying it's probably not something anybody would have objected to, just because it was such a minor component of what someone would see if they were looking in that direction. Most of the view of the house was shielded, as I recall, by trees and other vegetation. And for that matter, I'm not even sure Madeira is a public road, but let's assume it is.
It is. It is.
Yes. Okay, well then cross that one off our list. We don't have to deal with private roads again. But I wonder if there is a way to word this that gives a little more discretion to the staff to determine whether the impact is enough that it really warrants it automatically going to the council, as opposed to only going to the council if there's some kind of objection or appeal.
We could certainly wordsmith a little bit. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that at this time. And I am reluctant to give that kind of discretion to staff, because it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. If we say, you know, it doesn't look like it might have an impact, but then a neighbor comes out and says, you know, they painted it black and it's ruining my views, and I paid such and such for this view from my house, and now you've just, you know, steamrolled this through. So there's always the opposite of the, oh, it's not, it doesn't look like, there's no way that could have an impact, and for somebody it certainly could. Which is why, again, we're making the recommendation that it is the most conservative language here. If the council wanted to eliminate criterion 2, we could take that out, and there are still those catch-alls in that the planner can elevate it to council if they feel that it is something that should be heard by the council. Additionally, it can be subject to a public hearing if a neighbor does feel that it deserves a public hearing. And lastly, the decision can be appealed up to council. So there are those 3 pathways that exist, even if we were to eliminate that language. So projects wouldn't still be able to just move through without any kind of scrutiny.
You know, I actually think it's fine to keep that readily visible. I mean, knowing that it would sort of block out a project like Elizabeth's, but going back to that deck cover, actually one of the early iterations that went before ADR had a whole lighting system as part of that semi-permanent deck cover. So it was quite a bit more than just cloth, and the lights were disapproved by ADR. So I don't know, you kind of have to look closely to see if there is an impact. So I like the more conservative approach, at least for this first year.
Well, I'd like to suggest that we tinker with number 2 and say something like, the structure is not readily visible from the public way. Well, first off, from the public way, so that means public road.
Yeah, that could be a public road or a sidewalk or
Okay.
public
Or-
right of way.
Okay. Or from immediate adjacent, unless, well, can't we just put unless staff deems it minor and insignificant in nature? I mean, you always have the right to escalate it. I don't, that would be my suggestion. I agree a lighting situation as part of this would be appropriate to, consider.
I
But
think adding something like minor, not very significant, like readily visible, sure, but if it's not a significant impact, then that could be something that, that would give the staff a little more discretion to approve more projects. Is that what you're saying, Elizabeth?
yeah, some language like that.
I support that, Patrick. I know you don't want to do it on the fly.
Well, I think I can, let me try something. So what if we have the language, the structure is not readily visible from the public way or from immediately adjacent properties, or has negligible visual impact as determined by the town planner?
Sure. You either can't see it or it has minor impact. That sounds good to me.
Do we want negligible or minor?
Minor.
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 Lawyer's perspective.
Minor.
Okay, so we can make that change. And again, the planner reserves the right to elevate it if for any reason there's a question about it.
And the adjacent homeowners receive notice, right?
Well, that's part of it, but Patrick was proposing to set up something online. That's an interesting idea. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, I don't think people are going to voluntarily go check a website page twice a month to see what Patrick's doing in the dark of the night.
Not that popular.
I wouldn't bother with that, really.
I agree.
Okay, so with that change, can we go ahead and do we need to approve this, or is this just a first reading?
The first reading.
Okay. So we don't need to approve it?
Well, we need to take a vote to introduce the first reading of ordinance number 708 as amended.
So moved. Oh,
Second.
All right, let's take the vote. Councilmember Breckus,
Aye.
Councilmember Kircher,
Aye.
Councilmember Cool,
Aye.
Councilmember Robbins,
aye.
and Mayor McMillan.
Aye.
Motion passes as amended.
Thank you, Patrick. Item 13, Town Council discussion consideration of flood insurance assessment by the town floodplain administrator regarding habitable structures within the special flood hazard areas in the town of Ross. Rich.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As your town engineer and floodplain administrator, my responsibilities, especially under the community rating service that we participate in with FEMA, is to provide as much information as I can to the local government and to the residents and business owners in town about the benefits of having flood insurance is one of them. Benefits of understanding the support and resources that the town has to offer as far as understanding what it means to be to own a house in the special flood hazard area. So tonight I'm presenting a little information on the flood insurance status of our residents that live in the special flood hazard area, including the commercial properties. So with over 200 properties in Ross that are in the 100-year floodplain, the special flood hazard area, I believe we are have the largest percentage per lot per capita of residents that are in a flood zone of any of the other agencies within Marin County. So it's very important that staff reaches out as much as possible, provides that information to our residents. So I'm going to share the screen right now and just go over the flood insurance status of our residents and commercial properties right now. Let me bring that up. So that would be here. So let me increase that. So can everybody see this here? So basically this information is two tables that they're using basically the same data. They're just arranged slightly differently. So on top we have this data that FEMA has provided us on request. The insurance policies by occupancy, by the type of building or structure that is being considered. And then table 2 below breaks out that same data as insurance policies by flood zone. So evaluating this information, we can see that we're fairly well covered here in the town of Ross. The residents, with the help of our reaching out to realtors and informing the realtors the need to disclose flood hazards to potential buyers, and that sort of information that we provide, seems to be that our residents are pretty well informed. However, there are 40 structures that are in the flood zone that appear either not to have flood insurance, or they have a non-FEMA flood policy that doesn't show up on FEMA's radar. So looking at the numbers here, just on the top, just to get an understanding of where we are. So this is the total premiums paid by single family homes and non-residential, i.e. commercial. So these are annual premiums that are paid. This is the total of the policy value that's in place for single family residents. The number of closed paid losses, this is the number since the town joined the National Flood Insurance Program in 1983, when most of Marin County agencies joined the NFIP after the major storms of 81, 82. There's been 190 claims to FEMA and I'm just looking at single family, for losses, and those losses totaled $8,585,000, which is not an inconsiderable amount of money. The adjustment expense, that's the out-of-pocket costs from the federal government, from FEMA, to cover these losses. So they track that as well. And then if you look at how that's distributed in the special flood hazard areas down here on table 2, most of the policies reside here in most of the policies themselves reside in the AE zone here, 97. That's the predominant zone, 100-year flood zone. Some of these zones no longer exist. So these premiums in the AO zone doesn't really exist in Ross anymore, but this just means that they got these policies when the AO zone existed. I think back in the 90s, there was those designations, and they've all been merged into the AE zone with newer maps that came out in 2016. So we're presenting this data to council tonight just to, I believe it's important that as part of our responsibilities to the community at large, to get this information out, to know that there are residents in town that do not have flood insurance. So part of what we do under the CRS program every year is we work with the realtors to make sure that they are providing information to the buyers or to the buyers in Ross. And we also put out mailers, just last week, I sent out over 200 mailers to everybody in the AE flood zone, giving them information about how to get flood insurance, where to go, what sort of services the floodplain administrator offers to the town. I mean, I'll actually, if they call me and they have questions about their property, I'll actually go out to their site and, meet with them in the living room and talk about, what can and can't be done and what could be offered, and the contacts that they could contact at FEMA, give them that information. So we offer a lot of services, and it's important to get that out to the town, including our website is fairly well organized to provide this sort of information as well. It could use a little bit of work. I'll be working on that over the next few weeks to get that more in line with the current information provided by FEMA. So that concludes my presentation tonight, and I'm available for some questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Questions, council members? Does the public have any comment, Linda?
I don't see any hands up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rich.
You're welcome.
Next, item 14, town manager update and council discussion on town activities in response to COVID-19. Joe?
Okay, thanks, Mayor and council members. This is going to be pretty brief. I was on a call today with the Assistant Public Health Officer, and we were going through where we are in the COVID cycle. And the good news for now is it looks like we're at the tail of what they called the first wave. If you looked at the data over time, it really is a bell curve where it spiked in, if you recall, in mid-June through mid-August, and it's been coming down. The good news is we're in the what's called tier 2 in the state system, the orange tier, and we're much closer to, or we're in the red tier, sorry. We're in the red tier, the second, but we're much closer to the orange tier than we are to the purple, and purple being the high category and orange being the low. If we keep progressing and not get new COVID cases, we're headed in the right direction. That being said, obviously it's the concern about will there be a second wave as people start to have more gatherings. They did have a lot of the cases in the previous months were in regions such as the Canal District, and that seems to be in much better control. So they're worried more about the general population, and obviously with the flu season coming in, and their recommendation is get the flu shot. Is one thing to do on top of the other stuff to help. Relate to what we're doing, it's pretty much the same operations. Obviously, we're trying to, with the enhanced dining opportunities outside by getting the picnic tables mentioned earlier and have the outdoor dining event, kind of see this as a pilot, obviously, to see how it works. Obviously, though, we're coming to rain season, but so look forward. And if anybody has any questions on anything COVID that
Questions? Any comment from the public?
No comments.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Item 15, 5 Allen Lane, variance permit and town council consideration of adoption of resolution number 2183. Matthew?
I am required to recuse myself, and I don't know how to do it.
Just block your video, Beach, on the lower left-hand corner.
Stop video?
Yeah. But don't sign out, just block there. Perfect, thank you.
Now, how do I know how to come back on?
You'll also mute yourself.
Huh?
You gotta listen.
Oh, okay. I thought I had to leave the room so I couldn't hear.
No,
Okay.
no.
Thank you, Mayor McMillan and council members. Planner Matthew Weintraub. Please let me know if you're not seeing my presentation for any reason. The item before you, item 15, is the Berry residence at 5 Allen Lane. The owners and applicant are Chris and Nadine Berry. The project site is an irregular lot located on the east side of Allen Lane. We can see here the west property line is actually the front of the property, very extensive street frontage, and the back of the property is this east property line. And so we can see that it's a very long, shallow lot. So with the combination of 25-foot front yard setback and 40-foot rear yard setback, the buildable envelope is actually very slim on this property, and the lower 2/3 of the property are essentially outside of that buildable area. So consequently, for any type of development on the property, variances are invariably requested and have been granted in the past. These total of 6 variances have been granted on the property previously in the past, including for the construction of the existing house. The current project proposal is to construct a new pool, a rectangular pool measuring 40 feet by 17 feet basically in the center of the open lawn area. And that is right this area here. A third component is the mechanical pool equipment and enclosure, which would be located here on the street side adjacent to Allen Lane. And third component of the project is a 44 square foot bioretention area and rock energy dissipator to mitigate for the increased runoff. And that would be located here behind the house, pretty much not visible from the public right of way or from neighbors. And proposed pool materials and colors are bluestone coping with dark gray glass tile for the pool. The proposal does minimize the amount of new hardscape on the property by minimizing the width of the coping and by basically not proposing any other additional new surfaces except for a small walkway from the house to the pathway or to the pool. The pool equipment location has changed over the course of the project. Through the advisory design review process, the pool equipment was initially proposed to be located in an existing playhouse structure that's at the rear property line. There was some discussion and an objection by a neighbor, and the owners took that into consideration and switched the location of the proposed pool equipment from the rear property line to the front property line adjacent to the street in a new enclosed structure, which is pictured here. And that new location is basically located as far away from all the neighbors as possible. It's also screened from the public right of way by landscaping, fencing, and a change of grade. In terms of stormwater management, a bioretention area is proposed. The applicant has actually agreed to oversize it. So it would be, the dimensions would actually be 11 by 4, so it would be 44 square feet. And it would be oversized by 47%, which means that it would accommodate much more runoff than would actually be caused by the project itself. Public comments were received, and at this time there are no objections to the project. There was initially an objection from an adjacent neighbor who was the neighbor closest to the originally proposed location of the pool equipment. Once the applicant decided and agreed to move the pool equipment to the opposite side of the lot, the objector formally withdrew their objection at the ADR group meeting and indicated that they supported the project at that time. They were also concerned with how the pool might be used, and they were able to have discussions with the applicant and have indicated that they're no longer concerned about how the pool would actually be used. And so at this time, there are all letters of support or neutrality on the projects. There have been no additional comments received since the advisory design review group process occurred. So that did occur on September 15th. The ADR group recommended approval, including some minor revisions that the pool may be shifted west or closer to the street to better align with the existing residents. The applicant implemented that change. The pool may be elongated to better fit within the site. The applicant also implemented that change. and the locations of the pool, spa, and steps may be switched for increased privacy, and the applicant also implemented that change. So staff recommends that the final revised project design is consistent with the ADR group's recommendation. So staff suggests that the key issues for the council to consider are privacy. Staff notes that the property is very well screened by fencing and landscaping around the perimeter. The mechanical equipment and enclosure would be located as far from neighbors as possible and would also be located in a very densely landscaped area. And the specific concerns raised by the neighbor have been addressed and withdrawn by that, and the objections have been withdrawn by that neighbor. So staff recommends that the privacy standards and criteria are being met by the project. Another key issue for council to consider is the stormwater management. There are minimal opportunities to remove existing impervious surfaces on the property. The existing surfaces are limited to the buildings, the driveway, and patios, which there's a relatively small front patio, and then there's this existing rear patio, which is shown here in this picture. The ADR group recommended that this patio not be removed because it's a nice design feature that fits very well with the property, and they recommended that there should be a bioretention system to to accommodate or mitigate for that increased impervious surface. And that bioretention system is proposed, and again is proposed to be oversized by 47% in order to mitigate the runoff that could occur, as well as additional runoff that currently occurs from the buildings. The request of the applicant is a variance request to construct a new combination pool and spa and associated mechanical equipment and enclosure within minimum required yard setbacks. That is the only planning permit that is required. And staff's recommendation is that the town council adopt resolution number 2183, conditionally approving a variance to construct a new combination pool, spa, and associated mechanical equipment and enclosure at 5 Ellen Lane. This concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions the council may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Questions from council members? Anybody? Should we hear from the applicant? Linda, can you bring the applicant in?
What is the applicant's name?
Nadine Berry.
No, there is no Berry.
Steve Berry.
Yeah, I don't.
Chris Berry. Chris or Nadine Berry? No?
A C. Berry with a raised hand.
There you go.
Oh, C. Berry there. Okay.
There they are. Hello.
Hi. Good evening. Thanks for doing this. I'm appreciative of everything Matthew described, because I'm sure we would have muddled through that terribly. I think the success story on this one was really working with neighbors, and this is a unique property from the standpoint that we have 9 that are contiguous to the property all along Redwood. And so working closely with the Babcocks to figure out what was a win-win, I think could have turned sour and in fact brought us closer, which was great. And we're hoping for your support in getting this project done, and obviously here to answer any questions you have for us.
Any questions, guys? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll bring it back to the council for any discussion or a motion.
I will move.
Madam Mayor, before we should open up public
Oh,
comment.
sorry, Ben. Any public comment, Linda?
No, I don't see any raised hands.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth Breckus.
I'll move to approve the 5 Allen Lane variance permit and adopt resolution number 2183.
Second.
All right, let's take the vote. And Councilmember Breckus.
Aye.
And Councilmember Kircher.
Aye.
Councilmember Cool.
He's recused.
Oh, that's right, sorry. Councilmember Robbins
Aye.
and Mayor McMillan.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Item 16, council correspondence.
And Councilmember Cool can now.
Yeah, there he is. Did it. Any council correspondence? Future council items, anybody? Could I just make a comment? You know, I think it's really unfair that we get slammed with a bunch of emails at 4:30 or 5 on the day of a council meeting. Ben, is it possible to have a rule that any comments need to come in by noon the day of the meeting?
You can have a rule, but they can just submit them at the meeting. You can't not have they have to have the ability to submit them up until the meeting and during the meeting. I'll look at it more closely. I know Tiburon has a policy where we have a cutoff time, and after that, the council members, the rule is clear that the council members are not going to review them. So we can look at our existing policy and see if there's something stronger that we can enact.
I would support that if anyone else would like to support
I would
that.
too.
Okay, great. Anything else for future council items? Okay, number 17, open time for public expression for matters pertaining to the closed session item in agenda number 18. Linda, do you see anybody?
I do not.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to move to closed session. You received an email from Linda, a separate email just for our closed session meeting. And I propose that we take a 10-minute break and everyone join the closed session at 9:10.
All right, I will be putting the recording on pause while everyone steps out.
So we should leave this meeting, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
So we are at item number 19, announcement of closed session action. There was no action taken in closed session. Do you need to take roll again?
No.
Okay, great. So we can adjourn the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks.